We're joined now by our guy Mike Schaefer from Husker247. What's up, Schaefer?
Not a ton. How are we doing today?
Oh,
Good,
we're
good.
doing all right,
Yep,
man.
can't complain.
How was the did you get to spend a little time in Lincoln this weekend?
I was not at the Friday deal. I had other obligations going on that were scheduled before I knew that this event happened. But I am aware of how things went from talking to different colleagues. It sounded like a good visit weekend overall in a variety of respects for Nebraska.
So the obviously the headliner Ahmad Hudson really got people's attention, got people excited about his capabilities. I know that your Rolodex goes a ways back. How much of this do you kind of look at and you go, okay, how do we have like a Micah Parsons situation here where this is a nice performance, nice to hear people say nice things about Nebraska, but I don't know how much actual value there is there, or how do you process that as you're kind of consuming all the information we got over the weekend?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people forget like Nebraska was legitimately in the mix with Micah Parsons. Like he had a big Friday Night Lights, but then he also came out for an official visit. It just so happened his official visit came during that Nebraska Ohio State game where most of the fan base left by halftime. And
But
so,
not
I got a wonderful photo of him just sitting on the sidelines eating popcorn with just kind of a wry smile on his face. So there was, Nebraska even had a crystal ball prediction from Steve Wiltfong at one point in time for Micah Parsons in September of that year. So there was something there, and there's definitely something here with Ahmad Hudson as well. And the thing with Hudson is there was something to it before this Friday even happened. He had come out to Nebraska before. He had a good relationship with the staff. He's been here with the basketball program. He's obviously at 6'8", 200 and nearly 40 pounds. I mean, he's a power forward and a tight end, and I think he wants to try to do both. Nebraska has offered in basketball. He met with Hoiberg over the weekend. So there's a relationship there. Throw in the Trey Taylor factor that he got to catch passes from the future quarterback at Nebraska. That can't hurt things. And then I think there's another family connection to Nebraska. I can't remember exactly what it is. But there's something else that makes Nebraska a bit of a draw as well. And so this is going to be a real target for the 2027 cycle. Obviously, very early in the whole process, but wouldn't be surprised to see him as a visitor for a game this fall and to continue to hear his name pop up over and over and over throughout the process. But of course, 2027 recruit, we're talking about December of 2026. We don't even know how Nebraska is going to play in 2025. There's so many factors that line up in all of this, but Nebraska's done a ton of great work on the front end. Now, if they could just win some of those pesky football games that happen between August and the end of November, that might help them out a little bit too.
Well, I mean, you have to throw those details in there about like actually winning football games. But so I want to just real quick on the Ahmad Hudson thing. I'm sort of fascinated by this basketball football dynamic because, and you would have a better sense of this since you get eyes on more recruits and nationally than I do. How like that seems really, really uncommon to pull off. It doesn't feel like a thing that we've seen, especially recently. There's obviously some very high profile examples of it, whether it's like a Donovan McNabb or a Julius Peppers or a Ronald Curry, whoever, right? But those are all 20 years ago, right? It seems super unusual as you're watching through these guys. Obviously, the opportunity to do it is pretty rare in the first place. But of the guys that even have the opportunity, is it as rare as it seems to me to actually try and pull that off? They usually end up picking one, right?
Yeah, I think some of it is that sports now are so individualized relative or specialized relative to where it was, back in that time, the names that we remember doing it. And even locally, I mean, Wilson Thomas and Matt Davidson
I
did
mean, Courtney Grigsby is
football and basketball. And so, it isn't unheard of, but it's also been a while since anyone's really done it or done it at a high level. And I think a lot of that has to do with how the season is structured. I mean, if you're at Nebraska playing football, you're basically busy in the best sense from August until January. And then you get your break. Nebraska makes it into the college football playoff and makes it a round or two. You go into January, or if they're playing in the Belk Bowl or whatever, and they're, playing on January 5th. So you'd have that. And then on top of it, the off season basically is 3 weeks for football now. And you're right back into off season workouts and mat drills and all of those things. And so I have my doubt that people will be able to pull it off. We've seen really qualified athletes and guys talk about it, but like Jalen Suggs, he ended up going to Gonzaga. I don't believe they even have a football team, but he's someone else that comes to mind. Usually they're so good at one sport that it becomes obvious which one that you're going to specialize in. With Hudson, it's football is where he's going to be recruited the highest. The question I have is, does he like basketball more than football? Because the answer there is yes. That I think almost changes the equation a little bit, but we'll see how that all plays out. I have my doubt that he would be a contributor in basketball if he's playing at a football school. It's just hard to get away from it. It's such a year-round thing.
If he does like basketball more, does that actually help Nebraska? Because you have to imagine a really high-profile basketball program probably isn't going to be as cool with him trying to double dip and not being able to contribute until January or whenever. Like, if Nebraska is willing to let him do both, does that actually help them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nebraska is one of the places that, because it's basketball, isn't going to recruit at such a high level that it can sort of do this. And, the way these things tend to work is he would count towards a football scholarship. So it would be like getting an extra player in basketball in January. And if we could even just provide a little bit of bench depth at the end of Big Ten regular season, that's not nothing at 6'8", 240 pounds, and just a good athlete that gives you 5 fouls and maybe a couple minutes. It depends on if that's what he wants. Mm-hmm. And if Matt Rhule is willing to allow that to happen for someone who has the potential to be an incredible tight end for you. I mean, there's so many different layers to all of it. And of course, the biggest thing is, don't really have to worry about a ton of it until he chooses Nebraska in the first place. But I think you're absolutely correct that this is one of the few places where doing both is like a real option.
Schaefer, when it came to all the things that went on with the 7-on-7, Ravi and Damon talked about it yesterday. I've seen a lot of people online saying, it wasn't based on commitments. It wasn't based on, trying to make sure that you got guys to say, hey, I want to be a Husker when they left over the weekend. Did you see this maybe more as like a long-term relationship type of thing, like a distance relationship where you're just putting out feelers, you're just letting people kind of see your house, letting them walk around, and even if it's not a commitment, I kind of thought it was interesting that this is an opportunity for all of these kids, all this high talent, to be able to see Memorial Stadium, to be able to see the facilities. And in this new era of the transfer portal and everything else, it's a chance to say, hey, I've been to Nebraska. I actually know what it looks like and could consider it down the road, maybe even 2 stops later.
Yeah, that's 100% what I think it was. I don't think they were looking to get immediate commitments out of 27s and 28s and 29s. Those are the guys that you're just trying to start that initial relationship. You're trying to give them a reason to want to come back to Nebraska, that they want to see what that stadium looks like when Nebraska plays Michigan in September, that they want to be here when it's a 2:30 kick against USC, and you see what it's a little bit darker in the day, and you get the fourth quarter hype thing going, and Nebraska's right in that game. I mean, you want to build reason for them to come back and see the atmosphere. On top of it, you want to combat perception. I mean, we all know what the perception of Nebraska football is, and unfortunately, most of us know what the reality of Nebraska football in the last 8 years has been. But you want to give people a reason to view you favorably. And a lot of these guys go to a lot of camps, and they talk to a lot of other recruits. And someone might be like, hey, Nebraska's talking to me. What do you think about it? And they're like, oh, the facilities are incredible. The food are incredible. The people are incredible. It's worth a visit. And then you're going to get piggybacking off of word of mouth. Like it felt in a lot of ways like it's just a big parade of home style open house. Like, we're throwing open Memorial Stadium. We're having these guys come through and see it. They're going to go back and talk to people. They're going to go back and think about, hey, that was pretty cool. And you mentioned the other big thing in the transfer portal era, just having a connection to a place that if they go, like let's say Juju Johnson, who is a potential 5-star defensive back from Long Beach Poly. Let's say he goes to USC or whatever, and it doesn't work out there, and he goes in the portal and Nebraska makes an offer. he's already got a frame of reference for what is at Nebraska. He doesn't have to think about like, okay, I have no idea. I haven't been there. I haven't seen it. Like, I think that stuff matters. And it wasn't about immediately getting a couple commitments that wouldn't be able to sign for, multiple years. It was about opening up the sort of door and just saying, hey, come check this out. See what we have here. And then go spread the news.
Kind of in that same sense too, Schaefer. Did this? You kind of joked about it at the beginning. Obviously, Nebraska needs to win the football games to be able to get some of these high-level recruits and keep their interest up. But in some sense, didn't everything that kind of happened with the battle in the Boneyard and all that sort of stuff? That's kind of, if that's the first impression people, or I should say recruits, have of Nebraska football, that's much better than raw Miami going and never traveling to Lincoln and never seeing the facilities and never coming out. And they're stuck in Florida, and the only thing that they see of Nebraska is, a bad loss or another close loss or the graphics or whatever the case is. It kind of trumps that first perception, if nothing else. And maybe it keeps your foot in the door, even if there's some struggles during the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing here is it's almost impossible for Nebraska to get a kid out of Florida if they don't visit multiple times. I mean, it's just it's one of these things where it's your introductory visit for a lot of these different recruits. And so the hope is that they're going to be back 2, 3, 4 times because they're going to be interested in what they saw on this last visit, and they're going to have a frame of reference to work with. And so it all just kind of builds upon that idea that you're not going to get commitments if you don't get someone here. The biggest seller for Nebraska football, because they're not winning games, is the atmosphere and the environment and what's set up here, the facilities, the fact that a lot of guys tell me what they like about Nebraska is that you go to one building and everything you need is in that building, other than when you're going to class. If you're hungry, the training table is right there. If you need somewhere to go relax and hang out, the players' lounge is right there. Study hall is right there. The weight and nutrition and strength and conditioning and all of that is all right there. It's a one-stop shop, and I think it's designed in such a way that it's an enjoyable place for them to be. And I don't think it's a big secret Nebraska wants their players largely living there throughout the day so that they're all around each other and that they're focused on football and all of that. I mean, that shouldn't come as a surprise that was a central goal. And so for recruits to walk away and be talking about that, I think they've really sort of set out and accomplished what they're trying to do.
We're talking with Mike Schaefer, Husker247. Schaefer, all right, I am as big of an advocate as putting commercials out for the program as anybody, but there were a bunch of recruits here, and I do think some people expect some of those recruits to eventually become commitments. Have you kind of heard any positive reviews that think, hey, there might be some guys here that Nebraska has a pretty decent chance of landing, whether in this cycle or the next one?
Are we talking the 7-on-7 or the official visit week? Because that's the thing. They had like so many events going on this weekend. There was a lot of important people that rolled through. Some of them for just 5 hours, some of them for multiple days. I guess rein me in as to what you want here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess anybody that has been kind of come across your radar that was here this week. That is, I mean, I know like Hayden Ainsworth is a name that people are throwing out there. Just anybody that was here this week and that you think Nebraska's got a real shot at landing.
Right. Well, we'll go with some of the OVs. I mean, I heard multiple times throughout the spring that Nebraska was in a really good spot with Luke Sorensen, and then there's a little bit of USC buzz, and then there was Penn State buzz, and then he got here this weekend, and Nebraska did a really good job, and that's tight end out of Servite, which basically Servite High School, which is in Anaheim, California. He came out for his official visit. He's still got one lined up with Penn State. But I think Nebraska's way out in front here. He's set for a June 20th commitment date. And so I like the Huskers' chances with that tight end, which is big because they didn't want to go empty out of a nice tight end class. And it felt, we just saw Isaac Jensen from Millard South committed to Missouri yesterday, I believe. And so if Nebraska can get Luke Sorensen, they're going to feel pretty good because they would have got one of the guys they identified as one of their 4 favorites early in this cycle. And so I think that's important. A couple offensive linemen walking away this weekend where Nebraska can feel good about. You mentioned Hayden Ainsworth. He canceled a visit to Florida State that was supposed to happen on Monday. I think that's a really good sign for Nebraska. If he's canceling that Florida State visit, and he's canceling it, not Florida State, it tells you he feels good about what he saw here. I think there's other sources I've talked to in the 24/7 Sports Network that believe that Nebraska has been out in front on this one, And it was going to be, if the visit went well, he was going to shut things down. So we'd keep an eye on that one. The other offensive lineman, Rex Waterman out of Arizona, it doesn't sound like he's going to visit Duke anymore. That was his next visit. It's a Nebraska-UCLA battle. He's been to Nebraska 3 times. They've been recruiting him pretty hard. Every time I've talked to Rex, he seems like he really likes Donovan Raiola and Matt Rhule and sort of what Nebraska football is. So he was someone coming into the weekend I felt like they had a great chance with. And then a guy to put on flip alert out of the weekend is Cameron Wilson, Syracuse commit, came up from Florida. This is someone, it's kind of been funny to me, committed to Syracuse, kept his Nebraska visit. And then every time he's been asked about Nebraska since coming out in the spring, he just raves about how they're the best facilities he's seen. It was the best visit he took, the best staff that he was around. And every time you put these quotes down, you're writing Syracuse commit, Cameron Wilson, and then it's just all this glowing stuff about Nebraska. So the big one there is that Florida State, full of ex-Nebraska defensive coaches, which all went and visited him, which made for a pretty hilarious photo of Evan Cooper, John Papuchis, Terrence Knight, and Tony White standing around with a target that Nebraska's going after really hard. But he's got a visit there. They want him. Obviously, that's an in-state situation. But I think Phil Simpson and Terry Braden have done a really nice job with Cameron Wilson. And so that's a defensive lineman out of Miami. And then we talked about Ahmad Hudson. We talked about the basketball football thing. Again, I mentioned it, and it sounds really good for Nebraska right now. And it sounded that way before Friday even took off, where he dominated and got to play with Trey Taylor and everything else. So that's someone, long-term, I think Nebraska really helped themselves with. They had some guys that I think I might botch the last name. I think it's Albert Simeon came up and practiced and was a 4-star offensive lineman, I want to say from Utah, maybe Utah or New Mexico. And he came out and had a really great time. And Mark Meadows, another top offensive lineman out of Florida, had a great time. I think a lot of the sort of guys that participated in the 7-on-7, the 28s and 29s had a blast. It's just too early to really dial in on those guys specifically. But of the official visitors, it sure feels like Nebraska could walk out with 4 or more from this visit weekend. It's going to be harder to get the Brian Bonners and the Kelvin Obits, but at least where things sort of stand, it feels like the momentum is kind of shifted and thawing a little bit in this 2026 class.
Schaefer, I don't know if maybe it's just me hearing Ravi and Damon talk about it before, what you're saying right now, and just kind of recounting the names and all of the official visits and the people that were there over the past weekend in Lincoln. But has it been almost like a quiet transition for Rhule and the staff? It was so vocal and loud about how the change and what they were going to do when the 105-man roster came out and how the differences in the portal and the people leaving and all that stuff. But it almost feels as if Nebraska's not afraid to try to go after these top targets anymore and to invite them in and to be able to almost be vulnerable in that sense of like, hey, if we want as many top targets to consider coming to Nebraska, we want them to come in and visit. I just maybe I just haven't been on the recruiting sense that much, but it feels like this is such a change from when Rhule was hired year 1 and we saw kind of the different, the hidden gems and the diamonds in the rough that were more heir apparent than what we've seen kind of in the recent few weeks.
Well, I think some of that is that they were so far behind the 8 ball in terms of recruiting and relationships. Here, they've been able to establish themselves and have had an opportunity to build a relationship with an Ahmad Hudson or a Mark Meadows or some of these other top 247 guys. And so I think some of it is a shift in that regard. I think some of it is it feels different because 2026 has been so quiet and it looks like it's going to be a relatively small class. I think one of the things that fascinates me about where Nebraska sits right now is they have a relatively young roster where they have a lot of guys they want to learn about in this 2025 season. And so they don't want to take too many high school players because they want to be relatively flexible if they have to go into the portal and take a bunch. And if they have a bunch of guys that aren't going to leave because things are good, then you don't want to get in a spot where you're having to cut people or take things away. And so I think they're just being really judicious about what they take in 2026, trying not to reach too much, but having a good base of high school player. And they're shooting for the moon in the 2027, 2028 classes. And right now they have one commit in 27. And it's a quarterback who had a big day in front of, national evaluators and a ton of other peer recruits last Friday and Trey Taylor. So I think some of it is you work with the hand that you're dealt. And so it might be a little quiet here for 26, but it doesn't mean Nebraska isn't willing to get in and try to swing some elbows. I think it's a bit of a bet on where they think they can be at the end of the 2025 season. I mean, if you put yourselves in this position and you go win a bunch of football games, your stock in the recruiting world is just soaring at that point in time. But we've been here before. I mean, Nebraska does a nice job building buzz for itself. It does a much worse job continuing that when the games start.
So, Schaefer, when you say, if they go out and win a bunch of games, like, is there a number in your head where that starts to shift? I mean, obviously they go out and win like 10, you're like, oh, this is great.
Sure.
Does 8 get the job done? Obviously, I would guess nothing less than 8 would. But like, have you allowed yourself to think about that part of it?
I have.
Too, though, it doesn't matter which games that they win.
Yes.
8 games differently are, obviously, like if they win a bigger marquee game, does that matter more than maybe the amount of wins?
I think it would. I think it's how they get to 8. I think it's important for them to sort of finish the season, or at least maybe the regular season, with a number in front of their name, get back into the top 25. Like, put yourself in the national conversation. This isn't they need to be in the college football playoff conversation, but when you're playing Michigan in September, you need to be undefeated and potentially be like the number 24 or 25 team in the country at that point in time, or you're on the fringe of it. Like, this can't just be Nebraska loses to Cincinnati, finds a couple wins, loses again to Michigan, gets a win over Michigan State, gets a win over Northwestern. Like they have to – some of these wins have to matter. They have to play and maximize marquee opportunities. And if you finish a year at 8-4, but you're 8-4 and you had some hard-fought losses in there, you are a fringe top 25 team, that sort of thing, I think that could be really helpful. I think 9-3 is sort of the if they can get to 9-3, I think they're going to have a really nice jumping off point for where they want to go. I think 8-4, we'll see what that sort of looks like. 7-5 is a continuation of a lot of things. And I don't know that you're going to get a big bump just because of that. But I think if you can stack 8-9 wins and you're part of the national conversation for once, instead of always being referred to as a sleeping giant, at some point you're just still asleep, or we got to get medication or something to wake it up. But nobody wants to hear about him being a sleeping giant anymore. They need to actually start winning football games, and they know that more than anybody over there. And that's why a lot of the decisions have led to what it has.
That's our guy, Mike Schaefer, Husker247. Schaefer, appreciate the time as always. We will talk to you again soon.
All right, guys, have a good one. Enjoy your Tuesday.